winds it down on African World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
And it is 9:01 here on Channel Africa, the African Perspective, live from our headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. A warm welcome to you. This is Tshepiso Makwetla, and we bring you 60 minutes of the very latest news around the world, from the heart of Africa to all the corners of it. Countless stories, various perspectives. We bring you the day's top stories from the continent and beyond, with the voices, the news and the perspectives that matter. Your world, your hour. Thanks for joining us. We'd like to hear from you. Send us your perspectives on 063 406 9126. Let us know what your thoughts are, what conversations you're having in and around your world, and what's shaping those opinions. And a reminder that we are live on the DSTV audio bouquet 802 is the channel number. We're on 628 on OpenView channel. And of course, you can also download the SABC Plus app, watch us live. We are also live on YouTube. So just go into at Channel Africa 1, and that's where we'll find it. So let's start with your top stories this hour. A coalition of 23 Togolese civil rights groups known as the National Platform for Civic Space and Development Effectiveness has accused security forces there and militias of committing abuses. At least 7 people have been killed and dozens others have been arrested in a series of anti-government protests. The coalition also says bodies have been recovered from rivers in the capital, Lome. David Dose is a spokesperson for the coalition.
Get Channel Africa on DSTV audio bouquet. Channel 802.
Des éléments des forces de l'ordre et de sécurité.
Elements of the security forces, who are supposed to protect the public and maintain order, acted in collusion with thugs, lawless, violent men at the service of the regime, and unleashed brutal, deadly repression instead of acting like professionals charged with public safety.
Du maintien de l'ordre public.
Malawi Human Rights Commission Chief Executive Habiba Osman says the lack of action by police following the attack on demonstrators remains a concerning issue. Her comments come as claims emerge that the Malawi Police Service and the country's defense force have failed to protect fellow citizens. Amy Diaz expressed this at the United Nations Embassy in Malawi. She's the charge d'affaires there, following the attacks by a group of armed assailants on demonstrators on Thursday. Osman says despite engagements with the police, there is a lack of accountability.
This latest incident is more concerning because the attacks were happening while the police were there and the soldiers were there, and the attackers were not apprehended at all while this guy was being hacked. So the only response that we've now received is from the head of state, Dr. Lazarus Chakwera, who has given out a strong statement condemning the acts, but also asking the Malawi Police Service through the Minister of Homeland Security and others to submit reports to him because, as you know, our president has been out, he's in Nigeria. So that statement was released in Nigeria where he's demanded reports, investigation reports on the same.
The UN's World Food Programme has warned that drastic funding cuts risk plunging millions of Sudanese refugees deeper into hunger. Since Sudan's civil war broke out 2 years ago, at least 4 million people have fled to neighbouring countries. The BBC's Shingai Nyoka has more details.
The UN's World Food Programme has told the BBC small food boxes that were meant for 2 weeks now have to last refugee families up to 6 weeks. The WFP has said it needs just over $200 million to sustain its emergency response for Sudanese refugees living in neighbouring countries for the next 6 months. Inside Sudan, it has scaled up assistance to reach over 4 million people per month, 4 times more than at the beginning of 2024. It will need over $500 million for life-saving operations for the most vulnerable within Sudan.
And in South Africa, legal analyst Alton Hart says there is apparent flouting of processes in the packaging of charges on the matter involving 4 former South African transport company Transnet executives. They're out on bail of over $2,800 each. The executives, including the former CEO Brian Molefe and Siyabonga Gama, appeared in the Specialized Commercial Crimes Court in Johannesburg. They are linked to alleged multi-million-dollar fraud and corruption cases involving tenders to acquire new locomotives. Hart believes the current charges should be added to the 2022 charges, wherein the group was similarly charged in the corruption case involving the procurement of 1,062 locomotives.
I think them now going in small chunks after these guys might just distort the state's case instead of helping the state's case to actually prove that there was a flouting of processes. I would think that you should be actually compacting these things and actually combining them to actually prove that on a number of occasions this was the modus operandi of the group and this is how the process, instead of trying this piece here and trying that piece there, trying to create a bigger picture. I think it will complicate the case more than helping the case.
And moving now to Central Africa, where Congolese gold miner Twangiza Mining SA has accused Rwandan-backed M23 rebels of forcing its employees to work against their will and without pay after seizing its mine in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. M23 staged a lightning advance earlier this year in Eastern Congo, taking control of more land than ever before in North and South Kivu provinces. The Twangiza mining site is located in South Kivu province. Tuto Ngobeni reports.
Twangiza Mining says it was ordered to suspend operations at the mine in May after M23 accused it of not paying taxes. The company, which is headquartered in Congo, describes itself as a Chinese firm. It says its workers were being held in captivity and forced to work in inhumane conditions without any security measure, remuneration or medical coverage. Reuters could not independently verify the company's claims. Twangiza Mining says production at the mine has been paralyzed and that the site was entirely controlled by a group of Rwandan nationals who work with M23 and claim to be new investors.
And finally, Switzerland has become the latest European country to experience record-breaking temperatures this week, with even the peaks of the highest mountains now feeling the effects. In response to the high temperatures, home care services are working to help the most vulnerable, especially the elderly and single. The BBC's Imogen Folks has the details.
This weekend, the 0-degree threshold rose to 5,000 metres, meaning ice and snow below that altitude will start to melt. But 5,000 metres is higher than any Alp in Switzerland. It's the first time the threshold has been crossed as early as June. Since 2022, 0 degrees centigrade at 5,000 metres has been recorded several times. Before that, only once. The high-altitude thaw puts more pressure on Switzerland's shrinking glaciers, which climate scientists say will be gone by the end of the century if global warming continues at its current rate.
Brings the time to 9:09. Just a reminder that you can reach out to us on social media at Channel Africa 1 is where you'll find us: Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and on X. And we are on just simply Channel Africa on Facebook. And of course, if you want to send us an email, all you have to do is reach out to us on info@channelafrica.org.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And we start in South Africa, where 4 former executives of state-owned company Transnet, Anoj Singh, Brian Molefe, Siyabonga Gama, and Thamsanqa Tjiani, have been released on a 50,000 rand bail each by the Palm Ridge Magistrates Court. They handed themselves over to the police this morning. They are facing charges of fraud, corruption, and money laundering related to a 93 million rands locomotive tender. The group was arrested in 2022 on a related but separate matter to be heard next year. Katlego Logodi has the story.
The four former Transnet executives handed themselves over to the police after getting information of their pending arrest. The matter is one of the state capture cases pursued by the NPA's Investigative Directorate Against Corruption, which IDAC spokesperson Henry Mamatame says is linked to an alleged fraudulent 93 million rand locomotive tender.
They are facing 18 charges that includes fraud, corruption, contravention of the Public Finance Management Act and the contravention of the Companies Act. These charges relate to the acquisition of 3 contracts for locomotives in Transnet between the period of 2011 and 2014.
The matter has been classified as a Schedule 5 bail hearing and set before Magistrate Brian Nemavidi, who keenly listened to the defense affidavits challenging the proposed bail amount of 200,000 rand by the state. One of the accused, former Transnet CEO Brian Molefe's lawyer, asked that he be released on a warning and for the matter to be linked to the ongoing case that was heard earlier this year.
The decision was made to charge me ostensibly on new charges, premised on the same facts, evidence and witnesses, and when deciding not to oppose my bail, but instead proposing an extraordinary and shockingly disproportionately high amount of bail, which in effect amounts to opposing bail. 30. In the premise, I humbly request the Honourable Court, should the Honourable Court be so minded, to release me on warning.
This was challenged by the state's advocate Santos Manilal, who called for the court to try the matter separately as it would be in the interest of justice.
Your Worship, the transactional advisory matter is a separate matter. It was a separate contract. It was the procurement of the transactional advisors on confinement. What resulted from that contract was then the acquisition of the 1064 locomotives. But further than that, Your Worship, in this particular matter, we are dealing with the acquisition of the 95 locomotives. We are dealing with the acquisition of the 100 locomotives. We are dealing with the acquisition of the 1064 locomotives, and flowing from that is the relocation of 2 original equipment manufacturers to the Port of Durban.
The proposed 200,000 rand was also challenged by accused number 1, a former Transnet CFO Anuj Singh's lawyer, Advocate Heather.
We cannot afford 200,000. We've made it clear.
You have made it clear.
If there was the number of processes that could have been followed, what we can afford at the most is an amount of 50,000.
That's fine.
And that amount literally had to be urgently acquired over the weekend from others.
The judge, Brian Nemavidi, moved to set down the bail, with the matter set to be heard in October.
Bail is granted and fixed as follows. Accused number 1 is to pay bail in a cash deposit amounting to 50,000 rand. Accused number 2, bail is fixed at a cash deposit of 50,000 rand. Accused number 3, bail is fixed at a cash deposit of 50,000 rand. And accused number 4, bail is fixed at a cash deposit of 50,000 rand.
The accused's passports have also been handed over, with both cases set to sit separately in October 2024 and the Moodley matter in February 2026, respectively. Katla Walrodi, SABC News at the Palm Ridge Specialized Commercial Crimes Court.
It's 14 minutes past 9 now. Now, the Judicial Conduct Tribunal probing sexual harassment allegations against Judge President of South Africa's Eastern Cape Province, Selby Mbenenge, has heard that the complainant, Andiswa Mengo, tried to resist alleged advances, but the top judge was not taking no for an answer. This as researcher Lisa Vetten, who has worked in the field of violence against women since 1991, delved into the nuances surrounding sexual harassment in the workplace against the backdrop of the electronic communications between Mengo and Mbenenge. The report by Kenny Mapanga may contain information that might upset some viewers and listeners.
Expert witness, researcher Lisa Vetten went to great lengths to paint a picture of the complexities surrounding sexual harassment in the workplace. an issue that was described as not black or white, and one which often blurs the line regarding consent. In addition, it could be followed by consequences for the victim should they resist the act, i.e. say no. Vetten elaborates.
What are the consequences of me saying no to somebody who holds a higher position in the hierarchy than I do? If I say no, I am their junior, will they take me seriously? And what are the consequences? Can this person victimize me? Can they make my work uncomfortable? Can they ask me to go and start doing work that I don't want to do? Can they start taking away workplace opportunities from me? Can they start speaking to me in a way that is extremely uncomfortable and makes my work miserable?
Vetten further explained that a victim may use strategies to manage the situation they are confronted with, which will manifest in patterns. It is against this foundation that Vetten went through a series of text messages between Benenge and Mengo, which she testifies showed certain patterns of a person who is reluctant and unwilling. For example, on the text before the tribunal of the top judge, requesting intimacy, Vetten argues that Mengo employed the strategy of evasion and deferment, while Benenge was unrelenting in the exchange.
So here I see the complainant working quite hard to resist the respondent, in that she twice tells him no in capital letters. So there's the no and the hi. And then it is impossible. So she is making it very clear there will be no intimacy. They can meet and they can look at each other in the eye and they can speak, but there will be no intimacy and there will not be any melting. But what I also see is him not taking no for an answer.
Vetten concludes in her analysis that Mengo was not a willing participant in the exchanges with Mbenenge, nor is there a blueprint to measure a response to this kind of conduct. In addition, Vetten adds that the judge-president ought to have conducted himself according to a certain standard.
So as somebody who must make these kinds of decisions, who must also manage people, you needed to have thought about what are the possible implications of this. Should I even go there? You are the person in the more powerful position. And as I say, with power comes great responsibility. So for that reason, you do need to be thinking about what could be the possible consequences of my conduct because of the nature of my role. I am a moral authority as a judge and a legal authority. And I am sometimes required to make decisions over these matters.
Benenge's legal team began cross-examination through questioning principles that point out to the criteria of expert testimony that can or cannot be accepted by the tribunal, alluding to bias on the part of the witness and a failure to provide an analysis based on all sides, i.e., questioning whether it would be helpful to the tribunal. The cross-examination continues. Kani Mapanga, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802.
And of course, we'll be looking at prospects of Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni being re-elected as president in 2026 when they hold the elections there next year. All that coming up. But now, let's move on to other matters. We speak about a financing conference that is underway. The 4th International Conference of Financing for Development is taking place with global leaders in Seville. The spotlight now on how the world will mobilize the resources and much needed political will to meet the sustainable development goals amid rising debt, shrinking aid and growing geopolitical tensions. A new report by the International Institute for Sustainable Development titled Financing for Development in a Fragmented World calls for a pragmatic, data-driven approach to help countries, especially in the global south, navigate this turbulent landscape. Tonight we explore the report's key findings and what they mean for Africa and beyond. Fernando Mora, an associate with the International Institute for Sustainable Development's Economic Law and Policy Program, joins us now from Seville. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Fernando, let's just first start with, as we mentioned, the premise or the the current environment under which this financing and development conference takes place, and if we could just perhaps walk back 2 years ago, just how different the situation is.
Yes, sure. Maybe to give you a very broad view on what are we discussing now, as you know, a very broad group of leaders or representatives of different countries are now in Seville, discuss in the conference on financing for development. And basically they are trying to reach an agreement on how to finance, as the name of the conference says, the development in the coming years. But as you said, the previous moment, I mean, for in a very broad view, or for people that doesn't need to know about this kind of discussion, this is a discussion of the UN. The previous version, let's say, the previous conference on development was in 2015, was FFD3, Financing for Development 3, and there countries reached an agreement who was called the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. And as you said, the dynamics of the world at that time were very different. There was, let's say, a peak of multilateralism. Together with the Addis Ababa Agenda, the countries reached an agreement on climate, the Paris Agreement, and also the Sustainable Development Goals. The three agreements were launched on 2015. 10 years from that point, we're in a very different world, in a very fragmented world, and in a more volatile conditions. So the discussion now is different, and countries are trying to reach an agreement on financing in a world that has significantly changed since that moment.
And as you say, the context being very different, but one that is pretty much coloured and underscored by economic shocks, fragmentation, and growing uncertainty. So the shifting international cooperation, you say, is the lowest common denominator approach. Explain a little bit more about that.
What we think is that as I said, the Action Agenda of 2015, it's a very broad document. It's a very long, it's like a toolkit where you have a lot of different, let's say, agreements on how it needs to be changed in the coming years. But the time now, it's very different from the conditions that we had at that moment. So, but we agree with the idea that that the document that it's going to be launched in the coming days, it's going to be very important. But after that, we will need to implement it, and that's the problem, because in a fragmented world where there are a lot of geopolitical tensions, basically what we are saying is that there is not a very strong agreement for doing a lot of things. So you are basically need an exercise of prioritization. You need to say, okay, from all these kind of things, where should we start? And what are the things that are more important? The lowest common denominator is not something that, it's not something that we want. It's something that it's happening anyway. So an exercise of prioritization and saying, okay, these things are the most important discussions that we need to have in the coming 10 years, using the toolkits that you are discussing now, is what we think that it's the most important part for, again, implementation of financing for development agenda.
So talk to me then about the systemic risks that exist for development finance. And just listening to you say it's about prioritization. If something is not of immediate concern to me, the likelihood that I'll place it at the top of the agenda, given the differences in circumstances for the global north and the global south, then what do you expect over the next couple of days? Because if this is a roadmap for the next 10 years, it means there are going to be some very contentious discussions.
There will be no discussions, not that strong discussions, but mostly because the US withdrew from the process. So there will be a document that it's going to be reached at a consensus, but a very difficult consensus, because one of the most important countries of the world is not going to be seated on the discussion. And this is happening in other places, like the Tax Convention of the UN, like the World Health Organization. The United States, it's in a position where it's not supporting multilateralism. So maybe the point of this is to say, okay, even when we don't have an agreement, because some of the most developed countries doesn't want to have this kind of discussion, there are important things anyway that we need to happen in order both to avoid a systemic crisis in different fronts, and we will discuss it. I think I will tell you which kind of risk we are looking at. And that's one point. And from the other point of view, countries need a north in what they need to do in order to, even in this very complex, let's say, landscape, countries can do things in order to try to move the agenda of development anyway, and try to retain part of the achievements that we had been seeing in the last 10 years.
So what kind of reform can coexist with stability? And I'm just thinking about, as you were saying, some of the more important conversations that are going to occur at various fora. There's a BRICS summit that is coming up next month, mid next month. And of course, we've seen some of the conversations out of the growing BRICS membership, that of global financial system reform. And there's the G20, which its own theme is about sustainability and mobilization of national domestic resources. So what is urgent to change, and what can afford for more latent discussions to reach stability?
We identified three dimensions, three geopolitical risks that we need to, let's say, put on the focus, because it's going to be very important for the coming 10 years. Because if these risks materialize, it could lead to a crisis basically on development. The first one is official development assistance. As you know, official development assistance is the money that countries gives, that high-income countries give to the lower-income countries, to basically in the form of grants, in the form of gifts. So that was very important in the last 10 years. It has been increasing, and now the geopolitical conflict in the high-income countries are making it. There are basically cuts in official development assistance, and this is very important, because low-income countries, the revenues both of the public sector and the dollars that you use to pay imports in low-income countries come at least 1/5 of total revenues both in the public sector and the external sector are related with official assistance. So if you have a cut in ODA, you will have a problem to finance public goods, but also you will have instability on the exchange rates. So that will lead to an increase in poverty in lower income countries. The second thing related to the external sector is that if we have a moment now, we have a lot of discussion on tariffs, and we have a lot of discussion on on trade. There is a lot of tension around trade, and in lower income countries, trading goods, it's the most important revenues that comes from the external sector. So if you penalize, let's say, the exports of lower income countries, they are going to face enormous problems in order to pay imports. In most of the cases, those imports are foods, are oil and gas, and all these kind of things that you need in order to sustain certain minimum levels of living. So that's an additional problem. And the third one is that most of the low-income countries, but most of the countries of the world, given the enormous levels of liquidity after both global financial crisis and COVID, the liquidity that central banks in high-income countries, they expand the liquidity around the world, and some of this liquidity went into lower income countries in the form of debt. So countries in lower income countries in these places are more indebted.
So
the problem there is that
how could then we achieve, as you say, that there is a need for debt relief initiatives that are focused on easing the balance of payments pressures and more transparent and stable ODA? What does that look like?
The first point is to try to reach an agreement that we need that kind of discussion, because it is not in place today. There is a lot of things in discussion. Let's say there is a discussion on, we need to change international financial institutions. Is that as much as important as official development assistance? We think that no. Or is that as much as important as trade disruption? We think that it's not. So we think that there is more important issues that need to be treated as fast as possible by the international community. And these three things that the international communities need to reach an agreement, it's mostly stabilizing ODA, avoid trade disruption for lower income countries mostly, and discuss seriously a debt relief for also lower income countries.
Right.
So
Fernando, I'm afraid we have run out of time. I really would love to hear more, but unfortunately I'm getting a rap on my knuckles to say time is up. Fernando Mora, an associate with the International Institute for Sustainable Development's Economic Law and Policy Program. He is a co-author of this report that we've been looking at, Financing for Development in a Fragmented World. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Fernando. So now let's continue with that. Joining us live now from the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in Seville, we speak to Aldo Cagliari, who is from Jubilee USA Network. Aldo brings a different angle, focusing on the politics, advocacy, and the push for real debt justice that shapes these global talks. A very good evening to you, Aldo, and thank you so much for speaking to us. I'm not sure how much of that conversation we were having that you may have cottoned onto, but good day, Aldo. Are you still with us? All right, we're going to see if we're going to get him back on the line. Let's take a quick break.
9 to 12 midday, Central African Time. On the Move with Palisa Tau and Benjamin Mushatami.
Should influencers be expected to be impactful in society? If there is a social or societal conversation that goes up, should we be waiting eagerly to hear what the influencers have to say?
They are more than just entertainers. They are thought leaders to some certain degree. They influence culture, they influence people's thought processes, they set trends, they shape opinions of people. And the sad reality is, although a lot of them don't want to accept it, I think we're getting better with them realizing that embarking in that journey and in that space comes with a certain level of responsibility.
I see it differently in that, professionals are already good at their job, but there is an optionality that they might have to use the position that they hold in society to be able to deliver a message. Lucille, you made the example of actors and actresses. So the same could apply to a sportsman. Just because someone's good at soccer doesn't mean that they have to have an influence over society from a specific standpoint.
Keeping you on the know and on the move. Zochitika ndimodapiri. Kamlondola wazochitika pena paliponse.
Nduna wazamalonda kumalawi waletsa kampani yopanga shuga ya Ilovo yomwe ndi nthambi ya Ilovo Sugar Group Limited kuti isiye kutumiza shuga kumaiko akunja. Malingana ndi nduna ya zamalonda Vitumbuko Mumba, izi zithandiza kuti shuga yemwe yakusowa pamsika azipezeka. Ndiye pano ndili ndi George Muhangu amene ali mu mzinda wa Blantyre mu dziko la Malawi, chimene chikupangitsa kuti shuga azisowa ndi chani.
Chomwe chikupangitsa kuti shuga azisowa ndichonena kuti panopo ili ngati off season ya makampani a Ilovo Sugar Malawi, kunena kuti sakutha kupanga shugayi okwanira chifukwa akukolola. Ndiye akamaliza kukolola pameneno atayambeno somano kugaya shugayi kuti azipezeka. China kuti ma distributors amene akumakagula shuga kaya ndi ku Ilovo kaya ndi kusalima shuga akumagulisa ku maiko akunja ngati Zambia, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Mozambique.
Zochitika ndimodapiri. Lolemba mpaka lachisanu pa nthawi ya 7 koloko kufikira 8 koloko madzulo pa Channel Africa. Hotlines.
It is Africa World Hour. Thanks for joining us. If you've only just joined us, continuing our conversation on the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in Seville. We on the line now to Aldo Cagliari from Jubilee USA Network, who's going to speak to us about focusing more on the politics, advocacy, and the push for real debt justice. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. We do apologize for the delay in the connection, but I thought let's hear your perspective. I'm sure you might not have heard some of the conversation we were having just a few moments ago, but really was about, national level policy reforms that are supported by international cooperation and support. What do you see there, given the focus that you say you're looking at?
Yes, well, one of the, first of all, good evening to everybody. Good evening to you. Thank you for having me. A key feature of the financing for development process has been since its very beginning back in Monterrey when I attended the first conference there. It was this convergence of the need for countries taking the lead on bearing responsibility for their own development, but that needed to happen with support from international policies. And financing for development covers all of the possible areas of cooperation, so all the possible areas where it could happen, when you talk about the debt policies or about trade or about the need for external investment, private investment, or reform of the international financial institutions that need to be in place for proper support to those local national policies of the countries. And even, it goes into domestic, cooperation on taxation policies. These it's something so important. Countries need to be able to raise taxes, but it's not just that they can do whatever they want to raise taxes. They will not be able to do much if there isn't also for that part of their national policy and international supportive environment of international tax cooperation. So across all areas, this is a key principle in the Financing for Development Conference, and it what informs the deliberations, since then until this is the fourth conference we are at now.
So let's talk about that. I mean, if you look at some of what the G20 through South Africa's chairpersonship has been advocating for, precisely that domestic resource mobilization and various financial models, including the implementation of taxes to be able to meet its demands in the face of the ODA cuts. For instance, as you say, it shouldn't be willy-nilly. But I want to talk about sovereignty. So if some of these countries, for instance, are saying that we'll do that, we'll leverage tax revenues through whether it's corporate taxes, whether it's improved tax expenditure management, reforms for targeting income, property, and corporate taxes. So the question is, will you not see a pushback from some of the global north countries, like the United States, for instance, who believe that domestic policy is something of their purview to object to?
Well, when it comes to debt, if we're going to talk about that here, there is of course, the sovereignty of the country. But these are all deliberations in which countries take, you take the common framework, for instance, which is a creature of the G20. You were just talking about South Africa chairing that body this year, that a grouping. All countries agree on something, and then it is also in exercise of their sovereignty that they agree to do that. And those are the solutions that we are looking for. And that is one of the reasons why the Financing for Development Conference is important, because it helps find solutions where all countries agree that they are going to take certain steps. And they also are exercising their sovereignty when they agree to take those steps. Now, you mentioned the United States, which is a particular case because in this moment, this is the first conference where the United States has pulled out of it. There were the three previous conferences. Actually, the U.S. was a leading force, and now it's not there. It's not part of the conference, and it's inevitable that I think there is going to be some handicap to the agreements reached. But I don't think that's a reason to say no. Okay, we are not going to have deliberations on financing for development. I think it's the country that can find some common ground should move forward with the initiatives that they can take. No?
So the world has, as you mentioned, changed dramatically since 2015, when the third conference adopted some of the agreements that produced the Addis Ababa action agenda. So there is room for reform. So if we're talking about capacity building from an international level through cooperation, these discussions obviously will be difficult, but they'll present opportunities and challenges, given what we've just spoken about. What do you foresee?
Yes, indeed. The world has changed, and this is why you also see that, for instance, in Financing for Development in Monterrey, there were 6 chapters, and then in the conference in Addis Ababa, there was the addition of 2 chapters that were on data, and on technology, and that it reflects that we also live in a world where this area that one could have conceived of them as pieces of some of the other chapters, but they acquired an entity where now they have they need their own space. You need to have a whole chapter to talk about what is the role of data in development, or what is the role of technology. And I expect that this is going to continue to happen. And so debt and the issues that were issues in 2002, even though debt arguably, it has continued to be a problem for many countries. But the type of issues that countries faced on debt in 2002 are different from the issues that they face now. There is a whole change in the landscape of the creditors. There is a change in the structures in which they borrow, change in the dynamics. So we at least we in Jubilee USA, we would argue that there is a debt crisis afflicting many countries today. But the form that debt crisis takes is a different form than what you would have seen in the late 90s or 2000s, and it's probably going to continue to evolve.
So, Aldo, you work at the intersection of strategy and policy. When we talk about debt justice, what is the biggest roadblock that you see right now in achieving meaningful progress?
Well, one very important piece in this outcome that we have promoted, that we think, and we promoted actually back in, not Jubilee in particular, but I personally was in that conference and working on this issue, a global sovereign debt bankruptcy framework, or something that will look like that. So we call it in different names. We could call it a rules-based framework for settling sovereign debt issues, or an international tribunal, or a framework convention on sovereign debt, as is the language that was on the table in this particular conference. But it's about essentially the same. It's about having some permanent, reliable institution to adjudicate issues that may emerge between debtors and creditors. And today we don't have that. We have the common framework, for instance, which you're alluding earlier, which is it's a voluntary development of the Group of 20. We don't know how long it's going to last. It's very malleable in a way, because these rules, and even the countries that get into the common framework are not sure what they're going to get when they are on the other side of the process, when they have finished going through it. So all of those things, that we need some more clarity in the system, in the rules, and this to me it could be the most transformational development, and it's very useful that we have now the germs of that in this outcome document, in the call for an intergovernmental process to figure out those gaps in the international debt architecture.
So then tell me about civil society and the role that they play or can play, particularly if we say, when we're looking at the trends and we're gleaning key insights from what we've seen over the past couple of years leading up to this. You say, and a few pundits have also said that there is a need to emphasize the roles of the public, private and external sectors, particularly in terms of diverse sources of financing.
Yes, and civil society plays many important roles in the whole process of development, and this is the reason why civil society, the architects of the Financing for Development conference, the first one, they envisioned that this needed to be a different type of process. It couldn't be just governments there. You needed something. They called it multi-stakeholder, and the other stakeholders of development they envisioned, in addition to international financial institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO, they were like those institutional stakeholders, but then they said there are also the non-institutional stakeholders, and those were the private sector and civil society, and so civil society is seen as a key part in the process of development, but also in the process of financing for development, and as relevant to all of those sources that you just mentioned, because when it comes to the public finance, there is obviously a role that civil society plays in screening, scrutinizing those policies that inform public finance. There are also, I think you wanted to say something.
Okay, no, thank you, Aldo. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I do appreciate some of the insights that you're sharing, and hopefully we will be able to speak post the conference to just wrap up our conversation. Much appreciated the time that you've given us. Aldo Cagliari, Senior Director of Policy and Strategy at Jubilee USA Network, speaking to us about their perspective on the Financing for Development conference underway at Seville.
Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802.
This is Africa World, wrapping up as we mentioned earlier on that we'll be looking at the electoral climate environment in Uganda. This as we've seen reports, statements saying Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni has once again thrown his hat into the ring, confirming that he will seek re-election in 2026. At 80 years old and nearly 4 decades in power, Museveni's latest bid raises fresh questions about democratic governance, political opposition, and, of course, the future of Uganda. The announcement comes amid concerns of growing repression, the use of military courts against civilians, and ambitious economic promises. To unpack these implications in this development, we're joined now by Ugandan political analyst and commentator Timothy Kalyagira. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Good evening. Thank you.
Just a frank question, Timothy. Does this come as a surprise at all that President Museveni is wanting to run for re-election?
No, it comes as no surprise to any Ugandan or anybody in the region that knows the country and the trends. No surprise whatsoever. It's something we all had anticipated even 10 years ago. We could have told you this.
But there's also the fact that there has been word over the years that he is grooming his son to take over. In fact, that his son has been making musings, comments that not only support what some have said are the extreme positions that his father's taken, some quite controversial himself, but that it may also be a smokescreen to say he's running, but just to make sure that he hands over power to his son. Are these far-fetched?
Well, regarding this question about his son, well, yes, that has been the talk for the last 25 years. The question of, after Museveni, is his son, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, the command of the army. And yes, you're right about his son's controversial statements. In fact, there's a minority trend of thought in the country that actually Museveni had intended to step down next year, that 2026, which should be the 40th year in power. But then, as you say, his son's controversial statements, that have rattled not just the country but also neighboring countries, some people say might have got his father to rethink and reconsider his stepping down. And so, in other words, this next term, 2026 to 2031, almost seems to be like a mandate from a last-minute addition intended to sort of like work out the question of succession. If his son is going to behave this way, then either the son must be tamed or given more time to develop political maturity and a more measured tone, or alternatively found from within the family. That's thinking in quarters of the country.
Mm-hmm. Then there is the use of military courts to try civilians and what have been termed arbitrary charges and human rights abuses against members of the oppositions, those who are seeking to contest the position of a president in Uganda. And some of the incidents, including some of the laws that are considered autocratic that have been implemented in Uganda. Then can you paint a picture for us over the next 12 months what is likely to happen?
Yes, those courts, as most of the public feel, really are just an extension of the military system. Or to put it another way, it really is and has been a military government from day one in January 1986, except to appease, I guess, the international community and the post-Cold War thinking of the time. It was dressed up as a civilian government. So over the next 12 months, to answer the question, or even over the next 6 months, we're going to have what we call the regular courts, the civil courts, the high court, the magistrates courts, handling ordinary state matters that have of no great political consequence. And then the more politically sensitive cases, especially, as you say, those that are perceived as challenging the government in power, will be taken to the military court, where, of course, unlike the civil court, there isn't this long period of jurisdiction and debate. And so most people perceive it as the courts being prepared to take on some kangaroo status and, yes, try the political opponents of this government, and also use those same courts to send warnings to the general public against challenging the government. So really it's just another old 1970s story of a quasi-military government, except now it's dressed up in civilian capability.
And I did say 12 months and not 6 for this reason, because while one doesn't want to undermine the fervor of human rights activists and those who are in opposition to President Museveni's being at the helm, the question is, what is your temperature of the Ugandan people themselves saying, no, we don't want you, President Museveni, to be a flag bearer once again at the age of 80 or 81? Because if he does win the presidential elections, whether people object to those results or not, what happens? Do Ugandans just go back to life as they know it, protesting, but still living under what they see as an autocratic regime? And I'm not saying all, but some.
Yes, and I'm saying that, and that answers the question about the 12 months. So the earlier statement was about the immediate 6 months between now and the election, which is January next year. Then after the election, of course, is going to be the post-election petitions, and as many people think, and has happened before, the 6-month period in which the disgruntled percent of the population, like what you saw in Kenya recently and also last year, and to preempt that sort of uprising by angry Gen Zs, typical of Kenya and I guess Arab Spring, then that's what it will be. It will be a case of the election was decided by the official electoral commission. You have refused to accept the results, but this is a new and lawful government. So the next 6 months after the election, the second part of the 12-month period, is to round up dissent from the media to opposition activists, lawyers, anybody who might replicate what we saw in Kenya that was fighting this government here. And that becomes a new way. So we have like a two-court system, the main traditional courts to handle questions of land, crime, and other matters, then the more politically sensitive questions are handled by the military court. That's the way it's going to be, as it has been in the past.
And just very briefly, the ADF and the allegiance it's pledged to ISIL, would it play any role in what's going to happen over the next couple of months?
Well, if you want a brief question, the answer it is likely, although many people in the country have this perception that the statement ADF has now become like the way the name Al-Qaeda was used after September 2001 to sort of like become an excuse for everything. So in other words, there's been the report last week by the government that the army is going to investigate military intelligence officers who have been apparently faking some of these so-called terrorist attacks in Kampala. And so that's what people anticipate, that, some people within the military and security system might, stage some of these so-called bomb scares, blame them on the opposition, and then, of course, use that as a pretext to curb opposition rallies and so forth.
Speaking to us, and Ugandan political analyst Timothy Kalyagira speaking to us about his thoughts on Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni throwing in his hat to run for the presidency once again in 2026. Brings the time to 9:10, and that gives us time to catch up with Shayla Ndukumana after the weekend and what hotlines look like on this very cold Monday. Have the hearts grown cold? I know mine has. I am just too cold. I'm just too cold to be all snugly cuddly.
You can't be. This is the perfect weather. Think of it.
I know.
Perfect weather for you to have that special somebody.
All right, bring the sunshine into.
Listen, I don't think I have sunshine for you today, but what I do have is some critical info on men. Mm-hmm. So who's protecting the boy child? When we think about stats, I read somewhere that 132 million boys are without school around the world. And in South Africa, stats show that boys are more likely to drop out of school than girls.
Yeah.
Moreover, how are we protecting men? How are we ensuring that they are part of the cycle that we want them to be a part of? Be a supportive father, sustain your children, sustain your household, provide for us. How are we creating an environment so that they are capacitated to do that is the question. So that is the focal point, unfortunately, not keeping warm.
Well, I mean, you can't keep those hearts warm by just saying it can't be done. Yes, we can. You know?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you, Shayla. Well, that's the end of Africa World Hour this hour. Up next, Hotlines with Shayla and Kumara from us. Good night. Thank you.
Hotlines bring you fresh perspectives